I am the son of a billionaire, part of the 1% of the 1% of the 1%. Ask me anything. Very brief summary, I am 29 years old, my father is worth just shy of $2 billion, and he's on a rapid trajectory be worth significantly more. I'll leave it at that and provide details as requested. I'll try to be as honest as possible, but obviously I'll be vague on identifiable details. I don't really have anyone to talk to about this because of the uniqueness of the situation, so it's cathartic to speak openly about a subject that's obviously a bit taboo. I'd like to talk about it because it helps me feel more connected, and hopefully it will offer perspective to anyone who has preconceived notions on the super rich, not that I don't expect to validate some of the stereotypes. I'll try to answer promptly at the start but will be basically squeezing this AMA into my day, so I may disappear for a bit and then come back. Ask away, if you're interested. In sociology class the other day, we had an interesting discussion on how everyone seems to want to identify as being middle class. Poor people often say lower middle class, and people who make 100-600K a year call themselves high middle class. It almost appears that there's a stigma to being very wealthy. You even said it yourself in the description, that it is almost taboo to talk about being wealthy. I'm curious what your insight on this matter might be. For example, why do you think it's taboo to be rich? Have you experienced any resentment from people because of it? What's something about the super rich that you wish the other classes understood about you, as a way to try to make them possibly resent you less? Poor people often say lower middle class. This is interesting. Are you/your sociology class American? In Britain, by contrast, some 60% of people identify as working class even though many of them are not. I don't like saying I'm rich because there's a huge risk of resentment. I feel like I should apologize for being the 1%. The sentiment is that the money shouldn't be ours, that it's a zero-sum game and we're stealing from the poor by being so rich. I don't want people hating my dad because of how much money he has. He worked his ass off to earn it, and it was all to provide for his family, as is the goal of most families. That he happened to earn a lot more in pursuit of that isn't something I think he should feel guilty for. He didn't take from the poor, he just had a lot of success. It's jarring for people to vilify him because his career just happened to earn him an extreme amount of wealth. This is not to suggest that he's better than those who had less financial success. There's obviously luck and good timing contributing to where he is today. Resenting me I could understand more, because I did jack squat to earn it. But by the same token, I didn't choose this, so I don't think I should be vilified for something I effectively have no control over. For example, why do you think it's taboo to be rich? In all seriousness, look around Reddit for the answer to this one. There's a large and growing part of the population that demonizes the rich, and sincerely believes they're basically the root of every problem that exists in society. Hell, Bernie Sanders practically made billionaire a bad word, like the most evil and corrupt thing you could be was rich. I don't blame Op for not wanting to make it well known. Do your nearest and dearest know your worth, potential, or otherwise? Money never made the man, so describe yourself and your interests. Do you like toast? Do you despise cauliflower? Are you indifferent to Scrabble? And finally, how are you? Well, obviously my wife knows. We have one pair of friends who at least know my parents are very wealthy, since they've stayed with us at one of their properties. Everyone else, hopefully, assumes we have little more than the middle-class lifestyle that we provide for ourselves. Toast, love it. Cauliflower, my wife's good at disguising it. Love Scrabble but am better at the fast-paced games. I'm about as stereotypical as a Redditor comes, white, male, introverted, gamer. I didn't have much ambition of my own and will almost certainly never match the enormous success that my father has had. That leads to a lot of overwhelming guilt in my day-to-day life. What's that one thing you never got as a kid? A gaming console? Or as my dad affectionately referred to it, the Super No Friendo. Somehow computer games didn't fall into that purview though, so I had a top-end desktop and laptop anyway. Didn't stop me from being obsessed with gaming. The PS2 was the first purchase I made when I started getting my own paycheck. What are your thoughts in the Syria conflict? I'm not nearly knowledgeable enough to form a strong opinion. Oil prices did go up as a consequence though, so that's something. Do you have any regular friends now? What's a Friday night like for you? My wife and I are shut-ins and will spend most evenings just watching shows and playing video games together. When we meet up with friends, we meet at the pub or go to one of each other's houses. A couple times we have taken some friends up to one of my parents' properties, but only after we've come to know them quite well. But generally, unless I'm with my parents at the time, I live a very standard middle-class lifestyle. Something I've always wondered, if your internet or cable or phone or whatever ever goes down, do you, or whoever would do that for you, call the regular helpline of whatever company services your connection, or is there a special super secret high priority line you would have access to? I work for an $ISP running phone support, and I'm curious as to whether I may inadvertently get someone famous on the line one of these days. I actually wouldn't know, because almost all of those things are handled by one person who is directly employed by my parents. We tell him what he wants or what's wrong, and he makes it happen. My parents don't need to know how. What kind of schools did you go to? Were your peers wealthy? What do you do for a living? I went to a private school for grade school, a boarding school for high school, and then private university which I eventually dropped out of. Since the familial wealth grew as I did, the peer group evolved over time, but I never understood the extent of their or our worth until recently. My perspective was more than a bit off growing up. As for my current job, I work a generic IT position with a standard salary, nothing that will produce the kind of fortune my father's work has. I have to say, fantastic AMA. Your answers are breaking the stereotype you mentioned. I really like your lifestyle. Your parents didn't give you a free pass with their money, and the pressure to make as much money as them. It seems it's only you, not them, telling you to have more ambition. You look down to earth. My question, do your parents pressure you to want more? Make more money? In my situation, my father worked his ass off to have as much money as he does. I am ambitious, not as much as him, yet, but I do get just a little tiny bit of pressure from him. Well, I do think that my anxiety comes from my dad wanting me to do better, in part. As I mentioned elsewhere, I dropped out of college, I did terribly in school, had high overall intelligence and tested well but just failed to put in the necessary sustained effort. I've recently been diagnosed with ADHD and the difference since starting treatment has been profound, but I wouldn't dare tell my father that because A, he's convinced that it's a fake condition, and B, I doubt the diagnosis myself because it just feels like too convenient of an excuse. I've been taught that there's no excuse for not succeeding other than not working hard enough, and by that metric, I've largely been a failure. My dad's success and his hope for my success has been an enormous burden, but I think at this point he's generally given up on me having the same drive as him. Thoughts on economics and/or politics? Libertarian free market, radical socialism, social democracy, liberal welfare state? I generally lean conservative/libertarian on fiscal issues, which probably isn't surprising. What kind of car do you drive? A 2014 Subaru Outback. Prior to that, a very used '98 Outback. Probably not the answer you were expecting. As for my parents, the primary cars at each property are a Mercedes GLS and SL Roadster. They have lots of others, but nothing too fancy. Mostly old Chevy and Ford cars, primarily driven by the various employees they have. Have you watched the documentary, Born Rich? It's about other adult kids of billionaires. Too many times to count. As I mentioned in another comment, it's a rare opportunity to see the perspective of others with a similar upbringing. At what point in your life did you realize that your parents are very, very rich? Far later than I probably should have. I didn't really realize just how out of touch I was until around 23 or 24. Granted, we were worth significantly less when I was younger, but still, many things that I took for granted were definitely not common. Do you think you grew up in a bubble, so to speak, unaware of things those of more modest wealth take for granted? Any funny or embarrassing moments? I think so. Generally I was more naive than anything. I can't think of any specifically funny moments, but there are a lot of things that I roll my eyes about where I was much more flippant about possessions and experiences. I was just a kid who was excited by certain things, but I didn't realize that talking about them so much was likely very awkward for others who were adults and yet had experienced far less. I remember asking the person who maintains some of our land what his favorite place to travel to was, and when he told me that he had never flown on a plane in his life, I suddenly realized that there was a very big difference in how we grew up. I felt quite awkward and guilty about that one. Conversely, did you get an education in finance or philanthropy much earlier and more completely than most other kids do? Not really. The same Econ 101 class that most other people would have available to them. A couple years ago my parents wanted us to attend a UBS wealth management seminar, but I laughed it off at the time, not realizing the enormity of our wealth. I regret it in retrospect, because managing such a fortune is going to be incredibly daunting. At what point did your parents stop supporting you, financially? Do you have other siblings? Around the time I left college. We had a bit of a falling out actually, and basically once I got a job they took the car. I refused financial support, and other than them paying for counseling sessions I was on my own. I handled it decently after a while, I think, though to this day I perpetually live at break even with little to no savings because I never learned to manage it properly. I'm extraordinarily lucky that I can get away with that, another reason I feel undeserving. I have siblings, and I get the feeling that they've been better supported financially because they've lived their life much more in line with how my parents had planned. You mentioned that you live a middle-class life now and work in a normal job. Are you content with this or do you have plans to get independently wealthy? I'm not a strong worker. There are things that I'd love to excel at, but I lack the patience and focus to accomplish them. There are many causes and industries which I look forward to financially supporting once I am afforded that lifestyle, but I would be content to just live out my life as I currently do, with more perks, of course, and leave the ambitions to those who are cut out for it. Did your father insist on a prenup for your wife to sign before marriage? How often do you speak to your mom? Which parent are you closer to? They suggested a prenup, but it didn't happen. My wife hates their wealth and wants no part in it, so I'm not concerned about her trying to run away with it. My relationship with them is complicated. I appreciate what they've provided, but the emotional connection has been poor. I wish I could feel closer to them, but I just don't think they're wired for that kind of relationship. Dad's a workaholic, mom's a socialite, I'm the kid who didn't do everything perfectly and felt like the pariah for a decade. Things are better now, but conversations are rarely more than business and small talk. I'm getting a little overwhelmed by the number of questions, but I'm committed to responding to as many as I realistically can because I'm really enjoying the variety of fun, interesting, and tough conversations all going on simultaneously. I'll get back to it tomorrow and keep going as long as they keep coming in. 2 comments are slowing to a trickle, so I just wanted to say thanks so much for the excellent conversation. I'm not sure what I expected when I felt compelled to start this, but it went way better than I could have hoped. I appreciated all the questions, both lighthearted and challenging. It was a lot of fun, but it's also given me a lot to think about regarding my family, their wealth, myself, the 99%, and the future. And you suggested dozens of charities, I promise that I will look at all of them. I gained a lot from this. I hope that some of you did too. And I hope I didn't validate too many negative stereotypes. I'm not done responding still, and have a collection of questions and PMS that I intend to address over the coming days. And I'll keep checking in for new comments and messages.